opening notes. So you can go to the next slide. All right, so big picture, welcome and introductions. We're going to do more detailed introductions in a moment, but you can go to the next slide. Okay, well, noting that the live stream is going, we're good, Kim, on that front. That's great. Yeah, Lisa, take us over. Actually, I have a few practicing as a facilitator in this space. I want to acknowledge a few things jumping into this meeting. Because it is May, this is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, as well as Jewish American Heritage Month. So we are entering this space in that greater context. And with those notes, I will pass it off to Lisa for our safety moment.
Awesome. Thank you, Sophie. If we can go to the next slide. So being in the holiday spirit, this weekend is Memorial Day weekend. So just wanted to share a few tips on being safe this weekend. A little bit about pool safety. So instead of just sitting back and waiting for someone to save who's ever in the water, actually appointing someone to be the lookout person or the lifeguard while you guys are at the party would be more beneficial if something did occur or if something came up. So no one's wondering, who's going to jump in. Fire and grill safety. So make sure your grill has been thoroughly cleaned, particularly propane grills, and don't wear loose clothing while you grill. And last but not least is drink responsibly, consuming plenty of water before you partake in certain activities. Do not drink much on an empty stomach. Do not drink and drive, of course. And then elect a designated driver or find an alternative transportation home if you do partake in those special activities this weekend. And those are your Memorial Day safety tips. And I'll turn it back over to Sophie. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Next slide, please, Will. Okay, we're going to turn it over to EAG member D'Amico Walters for the equity moment.
Yes. For this equity moment, let's see. Here we go. We're going to focus on the procedural aspect and how it relates to equity. And we're going to look at for these, I like this, we kind of use this in my work setting. Just an example of equity. We have an example of reality, equity, equality, and liberation. And so as us as EAG members, as we endeavor to, we've been on here 2 or 3 years, to advise PSE on equitable practices as it relates to access to clean energy to our demographics. I was reading this article and it brought up a term called procedural justice. And basically what that term was speaking of is in our process, also a lot of times there are those who get lost, I want to say lost in the shuffle, and procedural justice deals with having equal voice. And so us as EAG members, I believe that we are in that role, in that stead as the voice for those demographics that are a lot of times that are not focused on. All right, so as we, let me make sure I have mine here as well. So let's speak on all these. All right, let's see. Sorry about that. So if we look at first, we have the reality. The reality is that make sure I get this. I apologize. Okay, here we go. Thank you all. If you look at the picture of reality, you'll see the box that in reality that there are those who are, like I said, that are left out. We see those that are looking for the game. We see that the reality actually, there are those who have more access to resources, more access to services, and more access to different programs. And so, and that's what we need to do, that many demographics in our community are either ignored or disenfranchised. It is the responsibility of organizations that render services to identify disenfranchised communities and recognize that disenfranchised communities are denied or restricted access to services due to social barriers. So we have equality. So equality sounds like a good term. Looks like everybody's on the even playing field. But even with that, as we can see with this, on this diagram in this picture, that's not the case. Even though equality aims to even the playing field, the practice ignores the fact that disenfranchised communities have specific needs, and the practice of equality may increase inequalities due to not recognizing specific circumstances and resources needed. Then we look at equity, and equity is what we're striving for and what we're looking for in our processes. So equity recognizes communities and groups that have specific needs and that a one-size-fits-all solution is not applicable. And then we have the last picture, liberation, which is what we're really striving for. And liberation is the removal of all barriers, where, as we can see with these three individuals, they all have equal access to viewing this game, because all barriers have been eliminated. So that's the equity moment for this month. Thank you all for being patient. I had to upload my notes. And
that's great.
And,
yeah, that's really helpful.
Thank you.
I'm a visual person and learner, so things like this really stick with me. Any reactions or thoughts before we move along? Got some appreciation in the chat there. Okay, well, thank you. For anyone who goes to a baseball game this summer, I want you to hold on to this image as you move forward. Okay, so we're going to go to the next slide, please, Will. This is where I have to go to my notes again. So as your interim facilitator today, so just listen to and appreciate the fact that in this group, there's a diversity of views and opinions. Actively participate. I know that it's late in the day, but the more voices that are here, the richer the conversation. Be constructive, courteous. My role here today is to move us along, ensure kind of a space where everyone can participate and to get us done so we can tend to our personal lives. And observers who are watching and live streaming, thank you for being here. You will have time at the end to share some thoughts during public comment. All right, next slide. So for those people watching on the live stream, if you're there, the public comment will start at 7 o'clock. My colleague Kim will make sure to put something on the screen to let you know that exactly the instructions. Until that point, observers stay in your YouTube land and just allow this space to be really centered around the Equity Advisory Group members. And then prepare your verbal comments, and we'll allow you to speak during that time, and you'll have a chance to talk to these Equity Advisory Group members as well as Puget Sound Energy. So stay tuned. Okay, next slide. Our agenda tonight. So we're going to do some PSE and EAG updates next, including some deeper introductions for some new members, some interim members, some facilitators. So we'll spend some time with that. We'll talk about the solar grant update. And my understanding is that this is a topic that was of interest to the EAG. So I'm glad that you'll have a chance to come back to this topic. We'll take a break, everyone stretch. And then we'll talk about equity in integrated resource planning. And that's going to take up kind of the next 45 minutes. There'll be some back and forth. We have a Mentimeter interactive activity just to start getting your feedback on all those topics, next steps, and then we'll hear from the public. Okay, any questions about our agenda today? No? Okay, doke. Well, we can go to the next slide then. Okay, so for this first point, I think I'm going to turn it over to Yvonne, who's the Supervisor of Energy Equity for PSE. Can we see and hear you, Yvonne?
Yep, I'm here.
Beautiful.
Great. So in terms of objectives for today, like Sophie mentioned through the agenda there, you'll receive updates from PSE and the EAG Steering Committee. We'll provide an update on the solar grant program, and then also talk about the electric integrated resource planning and how we're considering equity in that process, and collect feedback from you. All right, next slide. All right, so well, we go to the next slide here. Great. So I believe actually this is one of my first times speaking at an EAG meeting here. So, so I wanted to introduce myself for those who don't know me. I'm Yvonne Wang, Supervisor of Energy Equity. I'm in Troy Hudson's department. We'll work with Lisa McCall along with Will and also the new facilitation team to help to plan for these EAG meetings. So you might see me presenting at future EAG meetings going forward. So in terms of introductions, we do have a few new faces in this meeting. So we do have 2 new EAG members. Wanted to introduce, have them introduce themselves during this time. And we'll start with Chris Winters. He's filling a vacancy that we have. And then after that, we will turn it over to Elizabeth Bond. I believe she should be here, and introduce herself. She replaces Emily Kubiak from Sustainable Connections. So I will turn over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. My name is Chris Winters. I am not new to this area. I was born and raised in Oklahoma on the Muskogee Creek Res. Decided that Oklahoma didn't have a lot to offer other than tornadoes and wonderfully warm summers and cold and bitter winters. So the U.S. military was my chose calling, and did that for quite some time, and then decided skilled trades was my next adventure. So I've spent the past next month will be 32 years in the construction industry, and announced my retirement from that last week at the end of the year, where I'll be transitioning to, I guess I'm a retiree failure. I'm transitioning to a new line of employment in the private sector, hopefully, knock on wood. But I've been a resident here in Tacoma longer than I've been anywhere, and happy to be here.
Thanks so much, Chris. I just want to acknowledge in the chat that some folks apparently know you. There are other people from Kansas, and I think we all celebrate your quasi-retirement.
I'm a retiree failure. I'm a workaholic. Thanks to, I can say this, I have 1 month of unemployment in my entire life since, I'm dating myself, the CETA program, which was for underserved and low-income families on the tribal reservations in Oklahoma, where I worked in the 8th grade through high school during the summers at the school, learning industrial maintenance. And then when I got done with that, worked in the oil fields with my stepfather.
Yeah.
So I'm
Wow.
not sure what I'm going to do when I actually retire. I'm going to have to learn this.
Yeah, well, one of the things you're adding to your quote unquote retirement is participation in this group. So I think this group is lucky to have you. So Yvonne, next introduction.
Yeah, believe Elizabeth Bond, do you want to
Yeah.
introduce yourself?
That's me. I'm Elizabeth Vaughn. I am the Energy and Green Building Program Assistant at Sustainable Connections. Pretty new to the position. I started in March, but I have a background in like construction adjacent, which was a perk for green building, and an interest in energy, and did energy studies while at Western.
Welcome, welcome. I see in the chat everyone celebrating your decision to join this group as well. So thanks for being here.
Great. Well, we're glad to have both of you here. And also, I just want to mention too, another member update is Glenda from the Asian Pacific Cultural Center. I know she has another commitment going forward, so she won't be able to attend these EAG meetings, but she does plan to return by early next year. So you'll see her back then. All right, so next up, I wanted to introduce our new facilitation team. So we've selected Uncommon Bridges as our new facilitation team. We're excited to have them on board. We don't have an official start date yet, but we do want to give them the opportunity to, as part of their transition to attend this meeting and get to meet all of you. And we anticipate that we will have them start to lead the EAG meeting starting next month in June. So I'll pass it over to Ishmael as well as Ariam, who are on the call here, to introduce themselves.
Hey, good evening. Thank you, Yvonne. I will keep this brief, but I'm very happy to be here and be able to connect with the rest of the EAG. As Yvonne said, my name is Ishmael Nunez. I use he and him pronouns, a facilitator with a firm called Uncommon Bridges. We do a lot of community-based facilitation, a lot of work, a lot of times playing sort of that intermediary space between communities and institutions. I'm sure as we get to know each other, we'll learn a lot more about each other, but really foregrounding race and social equity has been an important part of just my life and lived experience, and also in our professional work as well. So excited to come on board as facilitators. We'll be listening today. I've been shadowing and watching the process and getting to know you all and the way you all do things, and hope to be of service and help to you all here very soon. So I'll pass it over to Ariam for a brief hello from our team as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ariam Ford, she, her pronouns. I am very excited to be joining you all. I am the Equity and Engagement lead at Uncommon Bridges, and am going to be the project manager for our facilitation of the group. So we're really excited to get started. My background, again, as Ishmael said, is in community facilitation and really understanding and uplifting community voices in institutional decision-making. I led an environmental justice nonprofit in Pittsburgh, where I am formerly from. And so I'm also, have been in the sustainability space, and my background is in city planning. And so also have a connection to infrastructure planning and outlooks and things like that as a military master planner back in the day. Chris probably may have been at one of the installations you were at. So I am really excited to be here and learn and to support you all in all of your objectives.
Great, welcome. All right, so next I wanted to talk about the EAG Steering Committee updates. So from that, one thing I wanted to bring up is we've received feedback and questions related to stipends, both from the EAG Steering Committee as well as from the recent EAG 101 session. And so we've agreed to review the stipend that we provide to the EAG members. And so we will get back to you of our assessment and what we find in one of the upcoming EAG meetings. And also from that too, we received some feedback regarding the recruitment process. So PSE will be reviewing that process in general and working to making improvements in the next cycle. So with that, I will then talk about PSE updates. So we do have a few for that. The Infrastructure Investments Job Act, so the IIJA grant. I know back in the March EAG meeting, PSE presented on that grant where we're proposing a project in the Skagit River Valley area to improve electric reliability. So we've asked for a letter of support from the EAG during that time. I just wanted to make you aware that PSE submitted its IIJA grant application last month along with EAG's letter of support. So we really appreciate that. And so we won't know of a decision from the Department of Energy until September. And so we'll let you know if we get that grant or not. And if we do receive that grant, there will be further engagement opportunities on this with the EAG. And then also I wanted to provide an update on the equity forum events this year. For this year, we plan on holding 2 forum events. And so similar to the 2 events that we held last year, which were in Mount Vernon and Renton. So for this year, one will be held in Kittitas County in September, where we're partnering with our wildfire team. And the second event will be held in Bremerton. We're partnering with the NAACP Bremerton, And that timing, we're still working with that organization to identify dates that could potentially work for them. So we're still figuring out what that timing looks like. So our request to this group is that if you're interested in being part of the planning committee, please let Lisa know or let us know through the chat today as well. So I anticipate that we'll start up the planning committee soon for that.
And Yvonne, I see in the chat that someone is asking about the date for the Kittitas equity forum.
Yeah, we don't have a date solidified yet, but it'll be sometime in September.
Great. Thanks, Yvonne. Yeah. So kind of task number one, if you're interested in getting involved, drop your interest in the chat, right, Yvonne, or email Lisa? Okay, that sounds good. Great. Anything else from you, Yvonne, before we carry forward?
Yeah, just a couple of other updates too is for August, we're planning for a grid operations 101 field trip. So that was feedback that we heard from the EAG members last year that you'd like more training around utility basics. So this will be an in-person field tour in East King County, where you'll get to understand how we manage our grid. So it'll be during the day for a couple of hours. And so expect to receive a poll from us sometime in June, to help to identify potential dates for that. And then finally, also wanted to make you aware of a UTC equity workshop that happened in March. I believe that we informed you of that event through email. That was held by, hosted by the UTC. It was an open public workshop. And this is part of their equity docket proceeding where they're seeking comments. And they're ultimately going to be providing guidance on how to implement energy equity using the 4 energy justice tenets. And so that workshop was focused on procedural justice. So PSE was in attendance in that March workshop, along with other investor-owned utilities and interested parties. So if you're interested in listening to that workshop, there is a recording, and we provided a link to that in the email you received for today's meeting materials. So with that, I will pass it over to Sophie to talk about the collaboration tool.
Yeah, I need to pause first because Yvonne, you had a lot of things on your list, and I just want to see if there's any thoughts or reactions. You talked about the equity forum, and I'm already seeing C and Jenny and Amasai might be interested. You talked about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, stipends, which I see C has followed up as well here. Stipends, excuse me, recruitment that C wrote about, stipends, Uncommon Bridges joining the group, 2 new EAG members, grid operations field trip, and the UTC Equity Forum in March. So there's a lot there. Just want to pause. Any reactions or thoughts, or if you want to elaborate on what you already put in the chat. All right, well, I think you all know how to reach Yvonne if you want to follow up in any of those notes. So just keeping us moving, I know that there was some discussion about you all wanting a collaboration tool. And so the team did some research and feels that piloting Google Groups as this kind of collaboration tool might be beneficial. So PSE created this group. You all can talk with each other, share upcoming community events, etc. As the tool is rolled out and you're using it, PSE will touch base to see how it's going, if it's working or not working. And then Lisa, after this meeting, is going to set up instructions on how to access this Google group and all that. So consider it a pilot to see how it goes and whether this is a good vehicle for you all to stay in touch. All right. I think, any questions on the Google group concept? All right, let's shift gear to the outreach calendar. Go ahead, Lisa, I think that's you.
Absolutely. Let me get my eyes on here. So hearing that you all were interested in attending some of the community events put on by PSE, we did reach out to the community engagement team, who was able to share their outreach calendar with us so that you guys may sign up for those public events. The calendar is currently on the shared drive. It is updated once every 2 weeks, as well as I will be checking it regularly. But if you guys do log on there and sign up for an event, I do ask that you just send me a quick email, just so there's no time lag in between that referral. Once you access the spreadsheet, you will be able to search and find events that are near you that you're interested in attending, and you can just put your name in that volunteer field. After that, I will inform the community engagement team, and the rep for that specific event will reach out to you to collaborate and give you more details about the day of. Similar to the collaboration tool, I will send that link to you all in the follow-up meeting, follow-up email following this meeting.
Great. So in the chat, Lisa, I'm just seeing appreciation for setting this up. It sounded like this was a request from this group. So everyone stay tuned for an email from Lisa with a number of follow-up items. Any other questions about this? Comments? Okay. Well, with that, I think we can go to the next. Actually, we're going to stay on this slide and we're going to turn it over to Kara. So Kara, do you want to share a little bit about the biennial CEIP update decision?
Sure. Thank you, Sophie. And so nice to see everyone and some new faces as well. Yeah, so I wanted to circle back a bit related to our biennial CIP update filing. We did send you a short note over email right after the decision came out. Gosh, it was near the end of March, but just thought we'd spend a couple minutes here to talk about it and see if you have any questions for us. So as many of you are aware, but just as a reminder, we put together that biennial CIP update filing last summer and fall, really just a few months after the commission had issued their decision in June, really, of last year on our original 21 CEIP. The commission approved the biennial update, which was great, at their open meeting on March 25th. And I did want to share with you all that, as part of the conversation we had in the meeting and in the conversations before and after, we did hear from the commission and from a few of the parties just a real appreciation for the collaborative work that you all engaged with us in, which really resulted in our working definition of deepest need. And those were a series of joint meetings that you all made time for in the heart of summer last year. We brought our Conservation Resource Advisory Group together with you all, our Low-Income Advisory Committee as well, and just wanted to note that we felt like that was a really neat opportunity to hear from you all and learn, and just grateful that you made time for that process. We really learned a lot, and it just showed in our conversations with the commission that they were really happy that we'd had that collaborative dialogue with all of you. So thank you. In the decision itself, the commission placed two main conditions on approval. And so one related to our directing us to maintain our annual interim target of 63% renewable, while at the same time also emphasizing the importance of affordability as we take actions to meet that target. And so the other condition we received from them, probably of a bit more interest to this group, relates to the minimum designation of energy benefits going to customers in deepest need. The commission directed us to set a minimum designation for our next CEIP that is at least equal to the proportion of our electric customers in deepest need. So that was a consistent theme we heard from many of you, and through that joint advisory group process, was that the target or the goal that we set should at least reflect the percentage of customers that fall into that deepest need category. So that is what we'll propose in our next CEIP and strive towards meeting. So all in all, we're happy to have the biennial update approved, and as we move forward to implement the plan really for the rest of this year and next year. So want to thank you again for all your support and engagement during the development of both the original CEIP for many of you and the biennial update last year, because it was a big effort. So thank you. And if there are any questions about the biennial, I'm happy to to answer them, or else hand it over to Matt Miller, who'll be more fun to listen to than me about House Bill 1589.
Let's take a pause and just see if there are any questions or comments for Kara with those conditions in particular. And out of just curiosity, can I see a raise of hands of those of you who were involved with the first CEIP? Little electronic hands or real hands. Seeing a few pop up. Very nice. Look at that. Okay. And then I think many more of you were involved with the biennial update. So just a quick show of hands who was involved with the biennial piece of it. Nicely worked. Nicely done. Okay. Wow. Well, if you have any questions, maybe anyone who kind of gave an update, if you could just put your email in the chat if someone has a specific question for you afterwards, that would be great. And turning it over to Matt to talk about HB 1589. And Kim, I know you're going to also drop in the chat the fact sheet about it. So go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Sophie. And thank you all for having me. This is my first time with this group. I'm Matt Miller. I do our state public policy and government affairs down in Olympia. And we had a lot of stuff happen this session, but definitely one of the most interesting was House Bill 1589. So my goal here is to make sure y'all don't fall asleep while we talk about this, because it is a utility planning bill, which for some folks is the most exciting thing in the world, and for others less so. A big portion of what this bill did, so this passed, the governor signed it, it is now in effect, is consolidated a lot of our planning processes at the UTC. So like our CEIP, for example, our IRPs, rather than doing a gas IRP and an electric IRP, we get to do them all as one with our CEIP and about a half dozen other plans that are all rolled in there together. It's kind of like a one plan to rule them all scenario. The UTC is currently undertaking rulemaking to figure out how to smush all these plans together so that we don't lose any of the requirements, but hopefully can be a little bit more streamlined. That rulemaking is to be done by July of next year. And then we have until July of 27, I believe, or January of 27 to submit our CEIP. The bill does a couple other things too. So it institutes a process where when we're making large electric generation or transmission investments, we can go to the Utilities and Transportation Commission and show them the project beforehand, and they can kind of tell us if we're going on the right track or the wrong track as the utilities working to meet the state's clean energy goals, and specifically in this case, CETA, the Clean Energy Transformation Act, that says all of our electrons have to be from non-emitting sources by 2045. And 80% by 2030, we're going to have to make some pretty big investments and buy or build a lot of clean power. So that's a very helpful provision. There's been a lot of communication in our world. I don't know how much it's seeped out into the real world about this bill, but you know, there's been some misinformation on it too, specifically saying that it is a ban on natural gas. It's not. We do have to put forward plans of what it would look like for electrification in our system, but that is just what I said, they're plans. So it's showing the commission specifically what an electrification plan in certain parts of our service territory would look like. We still maintain our legal obligation to serve anybody who wants natural gas. And I want to stop there and take any questions if y'all have any.
Yeah. Questions for Matt on House Bill 1589, what it does, what it doesn't do.
Oh, you guys are nice. Thank you.
Yeah, I know that many of you are involved with legislation as part of your day jobs. I'm curious, have some of you, were you tracking 1589? Anyone been hearing about this, or were your heads in other bill numbers? Been involved. Okay. Oh, Monica, please.
Just had a quick.
If your home has gas and you decide to electrify, the costs of those pipes have already been deemed prudent by the UTC, which means the rest of the gas customers have to pick up that cost. It would remove that provision as well as the electrification provisions. And so it's not directly related to 1589, but it has some of the provisions in there that they essentially remove from law. Did that answer your question? I know that was kind of a long-winded answer.
No, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
And Monica, that's helpful for me next time I go to Target. If we have the same Target in mind, I'll have context there. Yeah. Any other questions for Matt? Matt, would you mind just putting your email in the chat as well in case people have 2 a.m. revelations or questions for you?
Not at all. Happy to.
Okay. Well, before we move on to the solar grant program, now that we did introductions of these great new EAG members and the facilitation team, I do want to maybe have an outro and thank you to my team. I think many of you have seen emails or seen at least a lot of time with, let's see if everyone's on the line. Zachary Ott and Kimberly Zamora Delgado. If you're comfortable coming on camera, please do. If not, no pressure. These folks have been working behind the scenes for EAG Works for, 1, 2+ years. And I just really want to thank them for all their great work. We really say at Triangle that like a meeting is like an iceberg. The successful 2 hours that you see is the result of a lot of things that happen under the water there. And so Zach and Kim, thank you. And, perhaps one day you'll be a member of the public who observes one of these meetings and chimes in that capacity, but your official staff capacity is going to wrap up today. So thank you both so much. All right. And with that, thank you in mind, let's go to the next slide, Will. So I'll introduce Mackenzie Martin, who's the Clean Energy Product Manager. Mackenzie's going to be talking about the solar grant program. Mackenzie, is it okay if people have questions throughout? Can they just raise their hand, chime in?
Yes, if you could help call it out for me in case
Yes.
I don't
certainly
see
will.
that
Yeah.
someone wants me to stop, but certainly
Yep.
just chime
Great.
in with questions. So hi everyone, hello to those I know and hello to those I'm just meeting today. Today I'm going to share how the solar grants, formerly known as the Green Power Solar Grants, are evolving this year to better meet customer needs. And then at the end, I'll ask any answer any residual questions and then cover 2 ways for EAG members to be involved if you'd like. So the first is getting the word out about this year's grants, and the second is to participate in the review and selection panel. Next slide. So before we really dive in, I wanted to orient you to the times we previously talked about these grants or related topics. In July 23, we took EAG volunteers for the 2023 to 2024 round. That was the round that Jenny, C, and TJ participated in. And in January 24, we presented on what we then called the solar buyback customer journey. The reason I bring that meeting up is because since then we made the decision based on your suggestions to simplify, to combine the funding and processes for what was formerly known as the Green Power Solar Grants and the funding we had presented on for similar projects under that solar buyback program, and combine it into one solar grant that is hopefully a more easy, streamlined customer journey. And then in March of this year, Jenny, TJ, and C shared their experience participating in the solar grant review panel, which helpfully tees up this conversation. Next slide. So we've had 7 years of these grants and they've been working well, but 2 things have happened in the past year that has really given us an opportunity to re-envision them. So first, we received approval for that solar buyback program. That's helping us add to our pool of solar grant funding. And then second, we've received so much valuable feedback from you on how this process can improve. Again, whether that was in these larger meetings or the dedicated time that Jenny, C, and TJ took as part of the review panel. I'll also mention ways in which EAG member feedback drove change throughout this presentation, but I want to acknowledge that there is a ton of feedback we're implementing. So I won't necessarily have time to cover it all today. These are really just the headlines, but I'd be happy to share that list if anyone wants to see it. So what's changing? Very high level, and I'll get into more details on all of these points in future slides. But the name, we took this opportunity to remove the mouthful that is Green Power Solar Grants, and now it's just the Solar Grants. The eligibility has been refined. We've given more thought to what projects we will prioritize. And at your suggestion, we're introducing grant writing assistance for the first time ever. And we've changed the timeline a little bit. And by slightly, I do mean slightly. It's just about 3 weeks to help bring the conclusion of the grant process out of the holidays, which was providing quite a few logistical challenges. What's not changing, I'm oversimplifying a bit by only putting one thing on this list. There's certainly many smaller logistical nuances that aren't changing, but I wanted to emphasize that at its core, the solar grants are still meant for applicants doing important work with our named communities and meant to increase access to the benefits of solar to communities who might normally experience significant barriers. Next slide. So this year, eligible applicants are community-based organizations, government agencies, and tribal entities serving historically marginalized communities. In the past, eligibility was nonprofits, public housing authorities, and tribes serving low-income and/or BIPOC communities. So we expanded that customer type, and then we also broadened the communities served to be inclusive of other named communities factors that we consider. Still critical and required is that applicants must showcase how the savings they receive from the solar array will be used to directly benefit historically marginalized communities. And then they still must be a PSE electric customer. And all of the prioritization factors listed here are new for this year, thanks to EAG member feedback. We'll be prioritizing applicants who serve communities with deepest need. I know it's a PSE term, so how we're explaining that to applicants is that communities with deepest need experience multiple compounding factors that hinder their ability to access adequate resources. We're giving examples like communities without housing, communities experiencing linguistic isolations, persons with mental or physical health conditions, and examples of great fit organizations are immigrant and refugee support centers, housing support or shelters, and food banks. And if we receive enough tribal applications to meet the goal, we are allocating at least 40% of grant funding to tribal projects this year. We also wanted to acknowledge that we have funded many repeat applicants in the past, and they are, of course, wonderful partners. But instead, this year, we're going to give space to applicants who have not previously received solar grant funding from PSE, but tribes are exempt from that stipulation. And then we also want to elevate applications that include workforce development opportunities. This year, the workforce development component is moving from only receiving a few extra credit points to totaling 10% of the final weighting score. We also heard you that we can be more transparent about what makes a good applicant. And so all this information about prioritization is going to be transparently stated on our website and supporting application materials. Next slide.
Mackenzie, this might be just a natural break to see if anyone has any questions, knowing that many of you are connected to CBOs or organizations that might be interested in this. Anything before Mackenzie moves along? Okay, just wanted to check. Mackenzie, keep going.
So what are we offering? This is where the combination of that solar buyback funding comes into the play. In the past, the grants only had one pool of funding, the teal package A, but package B is net new this year. And the core differentiator is really the size of the project. So package A is meant for projects less than or equal to 100 kilowatts AC. There's 750,000 available, and grants can fund up to 100% or $100,000 towards eligible equipment and installation costs. And then package B is meant for projects greater than 100 kilowatts AC and less than a megawatt. And there's $500,000 available, and those grants can award up to 50% or $250,000 towards eligible equipment and installation costs. Interconnection costs are also eligible under that $250,000 cap in an amount not to exceed $50,000. We were encouraged by EAG members to be transparent about how competitive each of these funding packages might be. So we've shown applicants that about 10 to 15 projects can normally be funded out of package A, but only 2 to 3 projects will probably be funded out of package B. And another great suggestion from the EAG was to offer grant writing assistance. So that assistance will be conducted by our partner, Spark Northwest. We've set it up so that support is customized and really set on a spectrum based on the customer's needs. So for example, if an applicant has a really experienced grant writer on staff, Spark can review their application and provide any feedback to help make it more competitive. But on the other end of the spectrum, if an applicant has no grant writer, Spark can support the entire process, including contacting installers for bids and writing the grant application itself, of course, with input from the applicant. We don't have necessarily unlimited funds for this opportunity, so the grant writing assistance may be fully subscribed before all applicants can take advantage. Application materials encourage potential applicants to reach out ASAP to Spark, and we're going to be very transparent on the website and with our community teams conducting outreach if grant writing assistance does close early. This is our first year trying this, so I really want to acknowledge it might not be perfect, and I'm sure we're going to have a lot of learnings to implement for future rounds.
Mackenzie, I just want to call out a question in the chat here, which is Monica asks, is 100,000 sufficient for projects that are on the larger side of the up to 100 kilowatt applicants?
Not always. It depends on the cost per watt, which can vary greatly project to project. So I think a more average cost per watt might be close to $3. So that wouldn't fund a full 100% of a 100 kilowatt project. I will say what we typically see, because 100 kilowatts is still pretty large, most of the applicants we've received in the past are closer to the 30 kilowatt size. So we do end up funding all of those, and then applicants can stack funding. So we've also seen a lot of applicants come in stacking funding from Department of Commerce. Some are also eligible for a tax credit. I believe that offsets about 30% of the cost, so that helps as well.
Great, thanks for that. And in the chat, just C was just giving a shout out to you, Mackenzie, for organizing this. And of course, Leslie Rocchio, forgive me for the name pronunciation at PSE and
Rocio.
Rocio and PC and TJ. So some kudos in the chats there. Any other
Thanks.
questions?
It was a really fun year.
Yeah, any other questions before Mackenzie carries on? All right, carry on.
Okay, next slide, I believe. So now I'll run through the overarching process we use to administer the grants, focusing both on the applicant experience and how EAG members have been involved or will be involved in the coming year. I forgot to add a key, but the pink circles are meant to show areas where EAG members are directly involved. So starting from the left, we're striving to be very, very iterative. In January to about March, we work with anyone who was involved in the process to hear what we can start, stop, and continue doing to improve the grants. Then we take all those process improvement suggestions and weave them into the work plan and materials like the application or the new website ahead of the June launch. Then once all the customer collateral is prepared, we start early outreach to eligible applicants. At this time, they can have access to all materials except the application itself. And we really work with our community teams and our tribal government relations manager to conduct this outreach. We heard from EAG members that starting this outreach earlier will help increase access to more applicants so they can prepare a bit of ahead of the application launch on June 4th. And during the application period from June 4th to August 14th, customers can submit questions to me. I try to turn around and answer within 24 hours, depending on the complexity of the question. Then any completely new questions and responses are added to our frequently asked questions document and uploaded to our website so that all applicants can have access to the same information. And as a suggestion from EAG members, I'm also holding 2 live open houses where folks can drop in, learn a little bit more about the grants and ask questions, and those will be recorded and posted on the website. And I talked about the grant writing assistance in the previous slide. Assuming there's space and budget remaining, eligible applicants can contact Spark up until about July 31st. Any later, and Spark would not have been able to provide holistic quality assistance. Once the applications close in August, we start the review process. A partner of PSE begins by reaching out to all applicants to schedule an interview with them. We really don't want to judge an application solely on what's on paper, especially if the materials were confusing to any applicants or they didn't have time to list every important aspect of the project. So we really use these interviews to ask follow-up questions and provide another avenue for applicants to talk more about their organization and the impact the solar grant will create. Then the review panel receives 1-pagers on the projects, notes from the interviews, as well as the full suite of application materials, and spend some time on their own rating the projects. Technical feasibility is considered pass-fail, so we don't ask folks to look at that. Instead, we're focused primarily on the community impact of the project, the unique education outreach tactics the project may employ to educate communities about solar, and again, that workforce development component. Then all review panel members, which will be a 1-to-1 mix of EAG and PSE staff, meet together and discuss their ratings and work on final project selection and funding decisions. So this year, we're hoping to wrap this portion up by November and be able to notify applicants in November or very early December so they can get under contract with their chosen solar installer and begin construction of the project. After notifications are sent, we do offer debrief meetings with unsuccessful applicants to help increase transparency in our decision-making process, and then also get them connected with other PSE programs that might be a good fit. And then also new this year, we'll be offering a survey to all applicants to better understand their experience and how we can improve. And we also heard from you that accountability is important. So we're creating a check-in process with recipients at the 1-year mark to really ensure benefits from the system installation flowed to the appropriate communities.
Nice, thanks,
And
Mackenzie. Yeah, I know that you're going
yeah.
to talk about partnership opportunities, about how to engage the EAG in a moment, but any questions about the content or how PSE has used some of the feedback from you all in shaping this round of funding? All right, Mackenzie, what are opportunities for EAG members to get involved? You can go to the next slide, it seems.
So first, you are all so active in your communities. If you know of any eligible applicants, we'd love it if you could please spread the word. After this meeting, we'll follow up with the materials for you to distribute. And then second, we want to continue to have EAG members participate in the application review and selection process for this round of funding. So to give you some insight into the lift required to be on the review panel, we will start scheduling orientation meetings in August or September. And then all of the subsequent meetings usually conclude in December, although we may slip into January if that's when it's best to hold our debrief process improvement meetings. On average, it can take up to 20 hours of your time over those 5 to 6 months. But I would say those hours are really concentrated in the October to November timeframe when, again, you're reviewing applications on your own and then going into those funding decision project selection meetings. I kind of lost track, but I think this year we might have had almost 6 hours of discussion around which projects to fund because there were just so many great applicants. So if you'd like to participate in the review panel, you can drop your name in the chat now, or if you need time to think it over, please just email Lisa by June 14th. I also want to say this is not binding. So if you say yes today and then you decide it's not a great fit later, just let us know ASAP.
Mackenzie, I see a question from Megan about what time of day are the meetings usually?
Yes, so we can be flexible. This year, we typically did about 4 to 6 p.m., 5 to 7 p.m. So they can be after work hours. It kind of depends on who from the EAG is on the review panel and what their days look like. So when we do a big kickoff orientation meeting, we can talk about everyone's schedule limitations and how it makes sense to schedule. I typically send out a lot of doodle polls to get some consensus.
Great, thanks for that. And Chris is just noting their interest in the distribution of application to some of the underserved communities that he engages throughout the Native communities. So thanks for that.
Lovely.
Yeah, anyone else want to ask a question or jump in the chat with interest here? So actually, before we dive into the equity considerations for electric resource planning, I was replaying the beginning of the meeting in my head. And D'Amico, I really want to apologize to you. I made a joke about summer baseball season with that graphic, and that was treating very good. Okay, so Kara, can I turn it over to you?
Yeah, thank you, Sophie. So I have just a few introductory slides here to set things up for the conversation my colleague Alex will lead us through. So in other words, I get the easy slides, and for some of you, this is all information you're already familiar with, but hopefully a bit of a refresher and just setting a bit of context here. Many of you are already familiar with our dual fuel utility structure, but just noting for those of you that may not be as familiar, we have really two sides of our utility: the electric utility, which has a number of different sources that we can use to generate electricity. In the context of CETA, we talk a lot about solar, wind, and hydropower, but we also generate electricity through burning natural gas and coal. And under CETA, coal will be phased out, as many of you know, by the end of 2025. And then we have the gas utility, which uses primarily natural gas and now some renewable natural gas in our pipeline system to heat and for heating, cooking, and water heating for our homes and businesses. And another thing to just note about PSE is that our areas of electric and gas utilities do overlap in places, but they're not identical. So I'll just take an example. Here in Bellevue, where PSE is located, we're a dual fuel utility, but in Seattle, we only provide gas service, and the electricity service is provided by Seattle City Light. So it really just depends on what part of our service territory, whether we provide electric, gas, or both. And then sometimes when we talk about gas, it can be in two contexts, right? It can be on the electric side, the burning of natural gas to produce electricity, like in a gas plant. And then we can also talk about natural gas in terms of our gas system, where it's delivered through our pipe system to customers for, say, that heating and cooking purpose. So if you could go to the next slide. Matt talked a little bit about our number of planning processes and how 1589 changes that a little bit. So just a brief review for many of you. We have a number of different plans that we update and file, usually every 2 to 4 years. We're talking about the Integrated Resource Plan tonight, which is really a long-range 20+ year resource plan that we update every 2 years for electric and gas. And it really is about identifying long-term needs and the resources we might use to fill those needs. That plan essentially estimates our demand, so how much electricity and gas we estimate we'll need each year, and then the resource needs, so how much electricity and gas will we need to provide in order to meet the demand that we think is coming. I say we think it's coming because we have sophisticated analysis that we do to forecast, but it's a forecast, and so circumstances change, and we certainly saw that our forecasts that we prepared before COVID, of course, were a little different once COVID happened and patterns and life changed. So it's constantly a process where we produce new forecasts and we adjust accordingly. So that IRP process is where we think about demand, we think about what resources we may need to procure in order to meet the demand that we expect. The Clean Energy Action Plan is a component of our integrated resource plan. It maps out the actions that we plan to take over the next 10 years to deliver our clean energy supply. And then I've talked to you over the years about the Clean Energy Implementation Plan a lot, and so has Brian and Ray and others. It's produced every 4 years with an update in between, and so our 2021 CIP was the very first one. I talked about the biennial update earlier, and really this was the plan that the EAG was at least originally formed to support us in developing. So now, Matt mentioned House Bill 1589 and the changes there. These are some of the major plans that the legislature intended for us to combine through this integrated system planning approach. So we're beginning to work now on what that process could look like and the timeline. And as Matt mentioned, the Utilities and Transportation Commission will have a rulemaking process, so they will have a big say in what that timing and process may look like. Our current thinking is that we will ask the Commission to delay our 2025 IRP and CEIP so that we can pivot the work that we've already been doing and really focus on doing the best job we can to develop that first integrated system plan that will be due in January of 2027, which sounds like a long way away, but it really isn't. And so the law allows us to make that request, but we won't know for a while whether the Commission will approve that. So in the meantime, we will continue to do all of these, be working on all of these plans, and work on our 2025 IRP will continue. So regardless of how quickly we move from our current planning processes to this integrated approach, the equity conversations we've been having with you and the ones that we want to continue tonight will really be valuable to us regardless of what the name of that plan is and exactly what form it takes. So if you could go to the next slide, please. This is, again, another refresher on our planning process at a pretty high level. As I mentioned, we work on this plan, we start gathering data on what resources we have today. We gather data on how much conservation or energy efficiency we think is possible. And then, of course, how much energy use we expect from our customers. And throughout that, we have an extensive public participation process. Sophie has been our facilitator for a while now on the IRP side of things. And we hold more than a dozen public meetings over the course of a year or more. And so we've had several over the last few months, and that process is ongoing, and you're always welcome to join one of those meetings. And we'll add a link in the chat to the IRP website so you can see our list of past and future meetings in case you're interested in plugging into that. As part of the IRP, once we have all the data, and by we, I do not mean me, I mean the IRP team runs a series of complex modeling efforts to determine what the resource need is. And then at that point, this is where we began to get your input last year and the year before. We worked with you and you helped us create and implement what we call our portfolio benefit analysis for the electric side. This was our attempt to really integrate equity into the planning process using those customer benefit indicators that many of you and your predecessors helped us create for that first CEIP. If you could go to the next slide, please. So this is just a little bit about the previous engagement we've had with you on this, hoping that this refresher is helpful to you, because I know for me, if there was a meeting 6 or 9 months ago, it takes me a little while for my brain to get back and remember what we talked about. So we engaged you and also participants in our IRP process around that portfolio benefit analysis and what that could look like. We used that tool to help select our preferred portfolio in the 2023 Electric Progress Report. We also initiated some conversations last year about how we might incorporate equity into our work for the gas utility. Acknowledging that was a new concept for us and for the EAG, given that our focus had really been on the CEIP and on the electric utility side. Through those conversations, we got some great feedback from all of you. We heard interest in a cost-benefit analysis, which is really at the heart of what the portfolio analysis aims to do, while also considering equity. So we'll talk about that a bit more in a few minutes. Or when I say we, I mean Alex will, and I'll support her. We'll also dive deeper into benefits and burdens. That was something we heard from you and that we'll talk about tonight. We also heard you express interest in weighting and inherent trade-offs. And so that's something we've heard before, and we're thinking about how to best do that. And tonight's discussions will continue to move us in that direction and thinking about what that could look like. And lastly, you expressed interest in addressing a climate change resilience indicator for the CBIs. And so that's something that Brian on my team and myself will be considering as we work on this next CEIP process. I think I have one more slide. If you go to the next slide, please, before we pause for questions and turn it over to Alex. So this is really a part of a series of conversations we want to have over the next couple of months. We're starting with all of you tonight, looking at how we evolve that portfolio benefits approach to assess benefits and burdens of generic resources in an IRP. Then we'll host a public webinar next month, and we'll probably talk about this at a higher level in terms of our approach for both the gas and electric work. Then we'll regroup with our technical advisory group, the Resource Planning Advisory Group. We'll review with them some of the feedback we receive from all of you and the public, and walk through our approach on the electric side, and possibly start a conversation on what we might do similarly for the gas utility. Then we hope to come back to you in June and have a more focused conversation on the gas utility. It felt like it would be too much to try to do both tonight. And so we'll then go back to the technical committee to review the gas approach and go from there. So we're hoping that tonight's conversation, this series of meetings, will just be a great opportunity to get feedback from a diverse and engaged audience with all of you, our technical advisory group, the public, as we think about how we best reflect some of these equity considerations in the resource planning work, and as we all move towards this collective goal of the equitable distribution of benefits, as is indicated under CETA. So hopefully that was a bit helpful. Happy to take any questions if you have any, and look forward to turning over to Alex to get into more of the questions and conversation.
Thanks, Kara. Any questions or comments on kind of the big picture context setting that Kara did? Great. Oh. So Alexandra Karpov is the Energy Resource Planning Acquisition Analyst, and you're gonna take us through some more information, some more examples, and we're gonna hopefully leave about 15 to 20 minutes for the interactive activity. So take it away, Alex.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Alex. I use she, her pronouns, and I am one of several analysts on our electric IRP team. So I am going to discuss how we are considering energy burdens and benefits within the framework of our electric IRP today. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start by reviewing what we do in the IRP. Kara already gave a really great overview, but I'm going to just do a little bit more in depth. And then I'm going to discuss a little bit about how we incorporated equity into our last IRP cycle, which was in 2023, and then present what is new for our upcoming IRP cycle in 2025. We are calling this our generic resource burdens and benefits assessment. And I think our objective today is really to get all of y'all's feedback on this approach. And I think generally speaking, we'd like to just know what you think about the approach, and more specifically, are there any considerations that we have missed or elements you'd like to see us consider further? So maybe just keep that in mind as we go through. Next slide. So I know that Kara just gave a pretty good review of what our electric IRP planning is, but our process on my team really starts with that amount of energy that we anticipate our customers needing in the next 20 years. And then our job is to find the best mix of electric generating and storage resources that will meet that future need. And we do this using a model, and we input a ton of information into that model. Lots of forecasted prices, CETA requirements, among other things. And then what we get out of the model is an optimal mix of these resources. And that is what we call our electric portfolio. And then what we do is we mix up those assumptions and those inputs that go into the model, and we rerun our model multiple times so that we end up getting a suite of different portfolios. And they all have a different mix of electric generating and storage resources in them. And then finally, what we do is we select a preferred portfolio. And that preferred portfolio is an important planning tool for the utility. So it helps us set our clean energy targets for the CEIP. And then it also helps guide our resource acquisition. So I just want to emphasize that, like, we get a suite of resources out of our planning process, but we sort of hand it off down the line to downstream processes to actually go out and acquire resources. So that isn't actually part of our job within the IRP. So next slide, please. So for this upcoming IRP cycle, we have incorporated equity into our process following the 4 core tenets of energy justice listed here. And this is the first IRP cycle in which we've sort of looked at the IRP using this lens and this framework. And today, I'm not actually going to go through all of the different things on the slide. I really want to draw your attention to the 2 bolded items. The first one is up in that recognition justice tenet, and that's what we're going to do today. We really are interested in looking more deeply at the burdens and benefits inherent in our generic resources, and I'm going to get to that in a little bit here. But first, I'd also like to describe and remind you all, for those of you that participated in sort of giving feedback on this tool, but we ran, so our last IRP cycle, we ran what we were calling the portfolio benefit analysis. And this was a tool that we developed to help us identify a preferred portfolio that had the highest equity enabling potential. And so we're going to go ahead and carry this forward from our 2023 process and hopefully build upon it with this new assessment. So yeah, let's go to the next slide. So just to review our prior tool, this is what we did in our last IRP. We used select customer benefit indicators, or the CBIs, that y'all helped to develop for the CIP. And we essentially mapped some of our model output directly to those CBIs. An example of this would be reduced greenhouse gas emissions are a metric for measuring the environmental CBI. And our models for the IRP are able to output the total emissions for a given portfolio. And so we were able to look at all of our, like the emissions from all of our different portfolios and see which ones had the least amount of emissions. And we were able to do that for a number of different CBIs. However, there are some drawbacks to the way that we set this up, as in we were really only able to look at CBIs that had some sort of, or have some sort of quantitative measure, because we were measuring everything given numbers that we get out of our models, which are very numbers and quantitative based. So if we go to the next slide, we were able to translate. So this is a slide showing our tool that we essentially use to help us visualize what could be the most equity enabling portfolio in our 2023 IRP cycle. And I think what's critical to note on this slide is that the CBI index on the x-axis there is, we sort of did some math and ended up converting a lot of those CBIs and the numbers associated into an overall CBI index for each portfolio. And the higher the index, the higher the equity enabling components of that portfolio. And this is sort of that cost benefit analysis. So on the y-axis, we've got portfolio cost. And so we're really thinking that the best portfolio sort of balances the equity with least cost. So it would really land in that bottom right-hand corner. And you can see 11B2 is what we ended up selecting as our preferred portfolio in our 2023 cycle. So this tool is something that, I'm just reading the note from Dennis. I have a slide further on that will, we can go over which emerging technologies that we're going to consider in our upcoming IRP cycle. So let's see. I just wanted to point out that in the fall of 2022, Brian did present this this approach to incorporating equity into the IRP to the EAG, and we got some really great feedback from you all. And one of the things that we heard pretty loud and clear is that this tool might be limited in its scope of being able to really assess energy burdens and benefits. And so if we jump to the next slide, please. So we sort of started, given that feedback, on thinking about, for this IRP, how do we dive deeper into looking at potential burdens and benefits that are inherent to our portfolio and our preferred portfolio. And after a lot of back and forth with and guidance from our internal equity teams, we came up with this suggested approach for this year, which is to assess our potential burdens and benefits that are part of our generic resources. So if we jump to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about what a generic resource is, in case I know I get so embedded, I'm an analyst, I get embedded with our language, so I don't know what is obvious and what isn't anymore. But a generic resource, forgive me if I'm repeating myself, or not repeating myself, but telling you something you already know. But a generic resource is a generating or storage resource that produces electricity to meet our customer demand. And these are pivotal components to developing our IRP because they essentially form our portfolio. So what we do is we put a whole bunch of placeholder or generic resources into our model. And these resources are, they're not based on any actual existing generating or storage facilities out there. They're based on the latest and greatest technologies. So, you know, like we update our costs every time we do a cycle, we update our cost and our operating assumptions to make sure we've sort of got the most up-to-date things. And then what we do is put it into our model and run our model. And what we get is what our model tells us is essentially the optimal mix of different resources that will help us meet our customer needs from for 20 years into the future. And so like in this little example, if we were to input a wind resource, a battery, a resource, and a thermal resource, what our model will tell us is we need 1,500 megawatts. This is all very theoretical. Megawatts of wind, 1,000 megawatts of battery, and then 500 megawatts of thermal to meet our hypothetical customer needs. We put a lot more resources in than just these three, but that's all that would fit in this little diagram. So that's what I put in there. But it also, our model will also show us sort of an optimal schedule for like adding in those different amounts of resources over time.
Alex, can I pause you here just to see if anyone has any questions before you talk about how this plays out at different scales?
Yeah.
Questions or comments for Alex, knowing that Dennis will get to your question in a little bit here. Well, Alex, I should say I've been working on integrated resource planning stuff for 2.5 years, and this is the clearest definition of a generic resource. So for me alone, thank you. And I'm not seeing any comments from EAG members, so carry on.
All right. Oh, another critical component of a generic resource is because it's theoretical, this might seem obvious, but it has no site or location associated. And I think that that's important in thinking about how we're looking at equity, because so much of, I think, looking at how, you know, energy equity plays out is looking at how, like, which specific communities are disproportionately impacted. And in the IRP process, we're not actually able to get to the level of specificity of like knowing which communities are impacted. We can and do have a slightly drawn out view of or zoomed out view of location, which I'll get to in a second. So next slide, please. So this brings us to our generic resources, burdens and benefits assessment. So I guess the question that we really are trying to answer is, how do we best look at the potential burdens and benefits that might be inherent in the resource itself, no matter where it might be sited or located. And what we did to sort of develop the framework for this assessment is we turned to a literature search to look at what kinds of studies are out there already that have looked at impacts of citing real world resources. So like, what have been the burdens and benefits of citing a wind resource or a battery resource in a particular community, and what kind, and yeah, I think what we got out of this literature search is sort of a set of recurring elements that seemed associated with equitable outcomes. And so what we are proposing doing in this cycle, in this IRP cycle, is taking these sort of reoccurring elements that we saw in the literature, and I'm going to sort of call those metrics from now on, and really use those metrics as a guide to do some qualitative and research-based analysis on the impacts of each of the different generic technologies and resources that we're considering in our IRP for this year. And then this assessment will be incorporated into the IRP in two main ways. The first would be as a write-up, like a narrative that will occur in our IRP document. And then the metrics themselves, so all the different considerations, will filter over into our portfolio benefit analysis tool, which is that tool that we used last cycle, to sort of evaluate our different portfolios against each other, and essentially help us identify a portfolio with the most equity enabling components. So what I'd like to do next is take some time to sort of go over the metrics that we identified in our literature search and get your feedback on whether this approach seems like a good approach, and generally moving in the right direction, and whether our metrics are sort of covering things that, yeah, we should be considering. So I think that I broke these metrics into a few different levels of impact, again, based on sort of what I was seeing, what we were seeing in our literature search. But the first level of impact is on a global scale. So how do these resources have a global impact? What is happening on a customer scale? And then finally, what is happening within or adjacent to where a resource might be sited, so near the footprint of the resource. So jumping into the global scale, let's go to the next slide, please. The two main metrics that really jumped out at us were clearly the emissions. So does this resource emit greenhouse gas emissions? And then the other one that came up a lot, Dennis, I'm going to table your question and then come back to it. Thank you. The other main metric is that is end of life effects. So can this resource at the end of its useful life, can it be repowered? Can it be repurposed, or can it be recycled? Or does it go into a landfill or something like that? So moving on to the next slide. This is really looking at the customer, so the end use of that electricity. So if we site a resource somewhere, what are the potential burdens and benefits that customers receiving that electricity might experience? And these are going to look really familiar. These essentially are the metrics for the different CBIs that we have developed for the CIP already. So this includes, like, will this resource help increase participation in clean energy programs? Can it help increase home comfort? What about frequency and duration of outages? Access to reliable and clean energy? And then the what will be the impact on costs? And then finally, looking at the next slide, the resource footprint scale. There's 10 different metrics here, and some of these are also CBIs that we've seen before. But first and foremost, I know that I talked about, like, a generic resource doesn't have a location associated, but we are able to make some general assumptions. We know that a wind facility is likely to be located in a rural area, whereas a distributed battery is likely going to be located in more of a, well, I guess it could be located anywhere, but I was thinking probably maybe in a more of a urban setting. And so we can sort of make some best guesses of, is it likely that a particular generic resource will be sited in or near a disproportionately impacted community? Another really important question I think to consider is, will the community that is nearest this resource, is that community going to receive energy from the resource, or is that energy going to be exported? A wind facility is another really good example of that. Most wind energy from wind facilities are actually, like if we site one in Eastern Washington, likely that energy is going to be transmitted over the mountains to serve us on the west side. So it won't actually be serving that local community. Other things that to consider include land use changes, changes in the view shed, changes in noises. Is this resource noisy? Would there be any risk to local communities from toxicity, either to the air, water, soil, sediment? And then, yeah, what's the impact to the community health? Would there be any jobs created? If so, what kinds of jobs, and what are the quality of jobs? And then finally, what might be the decommissioning effects on the community? So, you know, I talked a little bit on the global scale of how a resource may be decommissioned and how that could affect sort of the materials, et cetera. But like, would there be any job changeover if a resource was decommissioned? So those are some of our slides for this. Yeah, these are the metrics that we've sort of come up with for this assessment. And I think that I'm going to take a moment to pause here, and I would be happy. I have a few more slides where I've sort of gone through and done like an example analysis for wind and battery resources. Our next slide actually is going to show, if we jump to the next slide, is going to show all the different generic resources that we are considering in our 2025 IRP. And so Dennis, we've got emerging technologies called out in this slide. I think that was your question. Okay. So the answer is, you know, we're considering a suite of different technologies. So in our energy storage, we're really looking at the duration of storage, but we are looking at lithium-ion batteries, which are a very tried and true technology, but our emerging storage technologies this year are including the case, which didn't fit in the slide. Sorry about this. It's called compressed air energy storage. So it's sort of a cool technology where they take air and they compress it and store it underground in these caverns. And then as they let it back out, it runs a turbine that then produces energy or electricity. The other one that we're looking at that's emerging is a long duration energy storage, which is this iron air battery. And that can store energy for up to 100 hours. So it's just using iron and air. So it's versus lithium ion, which is using sort of more rare metals. Iron air is really abundant, and it's also very cool. I'm very interested in all this stuff, so I can
you're
chill
lighting
out
up
on
as
it.
you're talking, but I want to make sure we leave room for the interactive activity. Yes. I see 2 questions in the chat. Maybe briefly, can you respond to the demographic question from Dennis and the kinetic energy batteries from Monica in the next minute, so we can switch gears?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm getting to my chat. Okay. Sorry, let me look at this. Okay. Does the current IRP model account for gradual changes in population demographics? You know, so we work with our forecasting team, and And so that's actually outside of the scope of what we do in the IRP, and I am not sure I can answer that. Does anyone else on our
Elizabeth
team
might be on the
know?
line. Maybe someone can
Yeah.
just respond in the chat and then we can move to the next question. But Elizabeth, maybe you want to weigh in there in writing. And then the next question in the chat here is, are kinetic energy batteries being considered?
So we are not considering, I mean, not in this IRP. And I want to, so for the IRP, again, I think the most important part of what we are doing with these generic resources is they're sitting in for placeholders. And one of the most important parts of energy storage itself is the duration of that storage, because the different durations meet different electricity needs, essentially. And so again, just because we're not considering it doesn't mean it's not something we would go out and try and acquire down the road. So yeah, just to reiterate, this is a list of what's going into the model, but everything's placeholder and it's not a shopping list. Yeah. Does that answer that question?
I think so. I think there's a number of great questions in the chat, and I actually want to turn it over to you all as a group. You know how you want to use your time best. Do you want to answer the questions for the next 9-10 minutes back and forth, or do you want to do the interactive activity, kind of generally getting your feedback? So in the chat, can you just put as EAG members how you want to spend your time? Q&A or activity? And then we'll see what people think. Questions? I don't think we have time for the activity. Okay, anyone else have thoughts? Okay, well, the nice thing about the activity is you can kind of do it on your own time. So let's do questions. Great. So let's not force this. So let's just, I can take a beat and breathe a little bit. Alex, were you able to finish the kinetic energy battery question? Do you feel like you got to that one before we turn to geothermal?
Oh, there's geothermal.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I did. Monica, let me know if that answers your question.
Great.
But okay.
Thumbs up there. So talk about whether geothermal is viable for the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, so old school geothermal doesn't seem to be a great option for us in PSE's service territory. There is some emerging geothermal, which maybe, Dennis, that's what you are referring to. And it is something that we definitely have on our radar right now, but we are not considering in this IRP cycle. We sort of, during our process, it was looking like it wasn't, we wouldn't even be able to get enough sort of data on it to put into our model, but we think probably we will consider keeping our eye on it for future cycles. But it looks like it could be, the advanced geothermal could possibly be a viable option for future in the Pacific Northwest.
Great. I see Matt. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to add on there, there was a bill that passed last year in the legislature where the state is going to do some geothermal mapping. They're going to look at 3 areas where we might have resources. And so the state is looking into this too, but to your point, it's still very kind of in its infancy in Washington state. So they're trying to map the resources for hopefully future energy use.
Yeah, great. All right, I am going to keep us moving along. I want to make sure everyone gets their questions answered. So just reading aloud, Amasai's question, data collection and research. I'm interested if there has been any data on energy access and affordability specifically for the LGBTQI individuals to better understand their needs and challenges. Also, if there's support research on the intersections of LGBTQI issues and energy equity to inform policy and program development. Alex, do you have any thoughts on that, or other people on the integrated resource planning team who are here?
You know, I have not, I don't know is the answer. I don't know if that has, if there's any data out there.
Great.
Yeah.
I mean, not great that you don't know, but thank you for recognizing that, and you know, perhaps bringing that back to your greater team there with resource planning, and thank you, Amasai, for putting that intersection before all of us. So then, Chris, you just wrote that the Nisqually tribe is talking about hydrogen collection storage to use for their planned training building housing projects. And then there's just some back and forth here with some integrated resource planning staff as they respond to questions. So I want to use 2 minutes right now to, first of all, thank you all for your questions, and Alex for your presentation. I'm going to ask Kim to put the Mentimeter activity into, I guess we can put it in the chat, and we'll also email you after the activity. My understanding is we set the link and the code to be active for 7 days. The question, just to get your brains going, is what feedback do you have for PSE with its approach for assessing benefits and burdens of generic resources? So think those 3 scales, think those examples Alex shared about what potential benefits and burdens might be when thinking about those generic resources. So email coming your way, Menti in the chat, and I won't be at your next EAG meeting, but perhaps the results can be shared with everyone. So wanting to just make sure we get to your public comments on time, I'm gonna suggest we move to the next slide, please. So actually quite a few slides over. Great. So for those of you who are still watching on YouTube, if you want to join the meeting to provide a public comment, join via Zoom, put in the meeting ID that's on the screen, or you can call in with that number with the meeting ID. So I'm going to get my participant list. Now is the time, if you are a member of the public, scanning for any new name. The next slide here is, I believe, next steps. So there were a number of action items that were discussed during today's meeting. I know Yvonne is going to send out some prompts. Lisa's going to send out some prompts. The Mentimeter activity will be sent out to you all, and you all will think about ways that you might want to be involved with the solar program, ways you might want to be involved with the equity forum, and all. I'm sure I'm missing some other items that were prompted for you all today. Your next EAG meeting is on June 18th from 5 to 7 p.m. So just about a month from now. And yeah, that will be an opportunity to carry on this conversation, looking at another face of the integrated resource planning process. So I think you can go to the next slide. I think that might be actually wrapping up.
Yep, that is all that we have.
That is all we have. That's the show, folks. So